Matt Gjertsen, welcome to What's Possible.
I'm so excited to be here, Ilene. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we are lucky because Matt has a book that will be coming out. So our audience is getting a sneak peek at what you've been working on. And I'm sure we'll have you back after the book is out and live and in everybody's hands. But for now, I will give the teaser of the title of the book, which is also what we'll be talking about during the podcast. But we won't dive in right away because, of course, we need to learn more about you as the human. So for our audience, the topic today is the minimum viable manager. That is also the name of Matt's book. So keep your eyes open for when that book release happens. And then I will re-invite Matt to join us so we can talk further about his book. So before we dive into the topic, Matt, tell us more about you as the human. What's behind all your work and goodness?
Me as a human, that's such a great way to phrase that question. I think almost the through line for my entire life is that I'm a huge space geek. I've always been really interested in space. And so that's what brought me into the Air Force, where I flew planes. That's what took me to SpaceX after I left active duty. And that's what keeps me excited today with a lot of the companies that I work with. We focus on hard tech companies. And so it's all about just how do we help build this great new exciting future that always seems right there. It's just right over the horizon. So I'm endlessly fascinated with space and technology and how do we kind of create the future. Also really into fitness. I'm a dad, so especially being a learning professional that I am, being a dad has been amazing because it's just this front row seat of, there are days when a kid's young where I feel like you can literally see their brain growing. So it's a lot of fun. So I think that's generally me as a human, huge space geek. I'm a dad, I'm a father or a husband. And then I do some running on the side.
Love it, love it, love it. I know kids have that way of keeping us engaged and also growing as individuals. I don't know about you, but having raised two kids, you feel like you're always learning. Every new stage they're in is a new stage of parenting too. So you're constantly on your toes.
Yes, I think it's one of those things where it's weird in the world today where so much, and everybody lives different lives, but I've gotten the opportunity to, I was in the military. And so when I was in the military, so many people had kids when they were 20. And then I got out of the military and moved to LA, and everybody there has their kids when they're 40. And so it was just weird. It was just so interesting seeing kind of the juxtaposition of how parents grow up either before their kids or with their kids or after their kids, like how it all works. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, no, I would imagine. Yeah, you're in very different cultures where you've spent your time. All right, so minimum viable manager. Let's have you define what you even mean by that, and then why is this so huge to you that you're actually spending time and energy writing a book on it?
Yeah, it's a great question because honestly, so when I first thought of the title, you do what you do. You mentioned to some people, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And I think one of the first senior HR leaders that I mentioned it to just had this visceral reaction of I would never want my managers to be minimum viable. That sounds so awful because you think minimum viable product is this podged together thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, but the intention isn't that at all. My intention is, I generally think in the world, we make management and leadership into this really big thing. We have lots of large concepts and ideas. We say people need executive presence and leaders are born. You can't, there's these things that you can't train into people. And I just don't believe any of that. and it creates a situation where the idea of becoming a manager is really intimidating, and especially in the worlds that I tend to live in with very technical people, can be very intimidating. And so we have these really great technical people who should go on to lead technical companies, but they don't feel like they have, a tangible enough roadmap to move into that space. And so the goal from the very beginning was to just kind of create like, what's the first thing, right? If you're an engineer and you're becoming a people manager for the first time, what are like the base level things that you need to be doing in order to be successful? And I learned the great thing about writing a book is it really pushes you to think about all the things you think you know. And so though the book didn't start out to being about this, I really spent a lot of time thinking through what I wanted. I tried to think about leadership from first principles. Like if we remove everything that we think we know about leading people and leading a team, what are the ground level truths about being a leader? And I basically broke it up into 3 basic components of leadership requires that you first get people to work together. Second, that you get them to work on the right thing. And then third, you improve the work over time. Like those are the 3 fundamental responsibilities of being a leader. And so then minimum viable manager is what's the first thing you need to do for each one of those components, which is build trust, set expectations, and give feedback. So that's the framework of the book, because it's like, okay, if this is the high level, this is what it means to be a leader. Well, then what's the first step towards being that?
Yeah. So if I were to kind of summarize where I think you're going with the title of your book, then it's not, be kind of just an average leader, but it's what's the baseline that you can grow from? So these are the core ingredients. And particularly if you're an independent contributor and you're moving into this leadership role, you've probably excelled as an independent contributor. Or sometimes we'll even find in our organizations where we might be coaching a founder who is used to creating things on their own.
Yeah.
They've now founded this wildly successful company, but they have absolutely no idea how to lead. And so as brilliant as they are, as creative as they are, that leadership is brand new. And so what I'm hearing from the minimum viable is this is your foundation. And then you can almost grow and personalize your own brand off of that.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. And it's funny because I honestly think if you sit down and think about it and like setting that foundation, the challenge is that so many leaders never get the opportunity to set even that foundation. And so when you do it, even though we're calling it minimum viable manager, you're honestly like might be the best manager a lot of people have ever had, just because so many leaders haven't had the opportunity to build that foundation or had it explained to them in that way.
What would you say if you were just to think about the various chapters that you've already written, which is the one that you find to be kind of the most important?
That's hard. I think, well, it's hard and it's easy. I think the first part is around building trust, and so the book is organized into 3 parts: building trust, setting expectations, giving feedback. And then in each one of those parts, the 3 chapters are kind of like why this is important, the psychological underpinnings of it, and then here's a tactical way for you to go employ this. And trust is just so foundational for anything to be able to happen productively in an organization with people that's like the standout. And really specifically, I think probably the chapter that's kind of defining why this is important is I just don't think a lot of people think about it. And it makes sense, especially for junior employees. For most of until we enter the working world, most of our life just naturally revolves around us like coming together with people that have common interests. Why else, if you don't have to, why else would you be hanging out with people if you didn't have common interests with them?
Right.
And so trust is relatively easy to build because you already have a foundation. Whereas in a corporation, all of a sudden you get matched with people that are very different from you. And maybe for the first time ever, you're having to talk to people with a different background and different interests. And so we don't always spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, how do we do this? How do we get people to, how do we build connections with people that we don't necessarily have a common interest in? And so I think that's definitely like the foundational thing. And that comes from, Amy Edmondson and work at Google, and Patrick Lencioni, and all that work highlights like this is the most important thing. And I think specifically around, I call it trust, Amy Edmondson calls it psychological safety, but that really resonates with me because she started her work expanding on research in the flying community. And
interesting.
we do a lot of work. Yeah. Her very first the way psychological safety started was she was trying to take this finding from the aviation world, where they had taken pairs of pilots who were brand new, fresh. They were just getting into the cockpit and seeing how many mistakes they made. And then taking a team that had been out on the road for a couple days, and they were like really tired, and seeing how many mistakes they made. And the team that should have been making more mistakes because they were really tired made fewer mistakes because they knew how to work together, right? And so that was findings from like the 60s or 70s. And her very first research project was trying to expand that outside the flying community into the medical community. And she had some results that she thought were going to end her career that ended up spawning this whole revolution of psychological safety.
Wow. I'm obviously familiar with her work, but for some reason, I didn't realize it started in that space. Yeah. That's so cool. Really cool. So as a consultant, you obviously go into organizations and work with them. What is one of your first things that you do around trust, or even to just even assess what is the trust level here? And then what do you do?
So there's a couple things. I think one of the things, is highlighting where the pain is. Mm-hmm. And I think very often, it's just asking the question of, you as a manager, where do you find yourself spending all of your time? Mm-hmm. And if you were spending all of your time either dealing with personality conflicts or funneling information because people only talk to you, like, okay, so like trust is the constraint here. like the lack of communication on our team, that's clearly the constraint for your team. And fixing the interesting thing is in my opinion, fixing that can be it starts in the easiest, simplest of ways. The very first thing that I always tell teams to do is just, hey, at the beginning of a team meeting, take 5 minutes to do a little icebreaker exercise. Something as simple as, what did you do this weekend, right? What's the last book you read, right? Like starting really, really baseline like that. And the reason why I always have people start with these kinds of exercises is because I saw firsthand on the team that I was leading at SpaceX how powerful that is, in that there were these interpersonal conflicts that were happening on my team. People were coming to me. They didn't know how to work with each other. I was a new manager and didn't know how to solve these interpersonal issues. I'm not a psychologist. I wasn't a trained coach. I don't know what to do. But for some reason, we started doing this thing where in the meetings we would just be talking about, hey, what did you do last weekend? What are you hoping to do? What's the last book you read? What's the last movie you saw? And through having these conversations over 2 to 3 months, all of those personality conflicts magically disappeared. And it was simply because people got to know, just like you started this podcast, people got to know each other as people and not just coworkers. And as soon as you know someone as a person, now all of a sudden you give them grace. You realize that they have other things going on in their life. You don't view everything transactionally. And so many of the tensions that cripple teams, as soon as you have that little bit of empathy for one another, it just goes away. So it can be the most magical thing in the world, in my experience.
I really love that because it boils down to connection, quite frankly. Yeah. We had a speaker at the summit, Julianne Holt Lundstedt. I hope I'm saying her name correctly. She came and spoke to us. She's the one that people always quote, that being socially disconnected can have the same effect on our physical health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. She said it's one of the most misquoted quotes because people equate it to loneliness, and it's actually social, not feeling socially connected is the actual what the research was. In this conference that I just heard her speak at less than a year ago, she said, as a society, we learned to socially disconnect so quickly with COVID. I mean, immediately it was like, shoop, everybody went home. Everybody figured out, how do we connect from afar? And there was complete social disconnection, if you will. And she said, now is the time for us to have rapid speed to start socially connecting again. And I
Yes.
think because we spend so much time at work, that is a key place to have those connections. Those connections can translate into trust. Trust can
Yes.
translate into a effective and productive and profitable organization. But you have to
Yes.
have the connection and the trust to be able
Yeah.
to build on that.
Yeah, it's where it all starts. And yeah, I think you're 100% right of how what happened during COVID, why it's so important now. And honestly, it's one of the it's been coming up a lot. I hadn't thought about this until about 6 months ago, but why I'm so passionate about why I'm excited my book is coming out now and why I'm really trying to make a big push is because if you think about who are the people who are becoming new managers right now,
Hmm.
it's a lot of
Yeah.
people who joined the workforce during COVID. So they
Yes.
had no, they've not been given any examples of how this can work and how this is supposed to work.
Yeah.
Their norm has been connecting with their teams through Zoom check-ins, and that's it. And, and so I think we're at a critical moment now where we're
Hmm.
going to see a spike in these challenges because it hasn't been a norm. And these people, so many of these new managers maybe have never had an example of what a manager can do. And it just doesn't take a lot. And so I think, like with so many things in the world today, though everything seems super overwhelming, honestly, for certain things, the bar has never been lower. And if you as a manager just show up and ask your people how they're doing, that's all it takes. And
Yeah.
suddenly you're the best manager they've ever had.
Authentically show that you care, you know?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's huge. Well, and I think to your point, we have a whole generation who, even if we back out further, they might have been in high school where things got cut short,
Yeah.
college where, in my daughter's case, midway through freshman year, you're going home and you're spending the next year basically doing school remotely. It's
Yeah.
so different. And then you start an organization, and when you think about where so many of us met some of our best friends, it was working
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
And I was mentioning to you, I was just speaking at a well-being retreat down in Mexico, and I met a young woman, an attorney, 30 years old, and I was asking her if she goes in or not, and she said, we have an office, we don't need to go in. She said, but I love going in because our work is stressful, the hours are long, and I love being able
Mm.
to pop in and connect with the people on my team because I don't
Mhm.
feel alone anymore. And I
Mhm.
think it's really key that we have that interaction. I know we're going in a bit of a tangent, but when everything is remote, that trust, it's harder to build, and that
Yeah.
deep connection where we can depend on one another and strengthen one another, again, for the good of
Yeah.
not only for the individual or for the two people who are connecting, but for the good of the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it all comes back to, psychology and evolutionary psychology. And we
Yeah.
just are social
Tribal
creatures.
people.
Like,
Yes.
yeah, that is what we are. And it's funny as I think about building better everyday studios, I originally wanted it to be, and it still is, it's a virtual organization. It's, the people that I work with, I'm only connecting with Zoom, but I do keep thinking, even for me who wanted it to be that way, I'm just like, man, it would be really cool if we had a physical office and if we
Yeah.
all just came together. And it's tough because there's a lot of that means a lot, and that imposes a
Hmm.
lot of limitations and it means a lot of things. But just like everything in life, I think all the best things in life are over hard, right? They're on the other side of hard.
Yeah.
And so it's figuring that out. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Little bit of a tangent, but it all comes back to like finding ways to build that connection.
To build the trust. And I'll keep us on the tangent for one more second. My daughter, who, like I said, ended up going home midway through college, she is in a newer position now works in New York. She is thrilled because they go in 3 days a week. They bring in lunch for the teams, and they have a happy hour once every however often. And so she's getting to meet her colleagues, and she's learning about the different areas of the group. And so I guess this is one of my pushes that I was saying this when I was speaking. At our stage of the career, we might feel like, oh, it's such a luxury to work from home. I'm kind of done going into the office, and I get that. But for the good of the next generation and for these minimum viable managers, that in-person really can make a profound difference on so many ways, even if you're not going in 5 days a week, but having a few days of connection points each week.
Oh, and it's such, the discussion around this, I think, really highlights the importance of trust, because as we saw in every organization that's kind of gone through the return to office discussion, like the vast majority of the pushback came from just a lack of trust. It was a lack of feeling like people had a say, like there was any discussion, versus it was just this mandate that came down one day. And so, whether or not you have that trust, it just makes all the difference in how hard it is to work together, how hard it is to change policies, deal with change. So it's a huge component.
All right. So we've sold people on trust. Let's go to expectations. We'll touch on expectations. We'll touch on feedback.
Yeah.
What is the one big takeaway, would you say, in your writing around expectations? And obviously your writing is based on your years of work, both, I'm sure, from in the airspace world as well as in your consulting firm.
Yeah. And so I think the big takeaway is that, almost definitionally, when you become a people manager for the first time, you're being promoted because you're probably one of the better individual contributors, and you've been a good individual contributor your whole life. And so it goes back to that old adage of very often the best players don't make great coaches, because they're just not good at deconstructing they've never had to think about that stuff before. Right. Now that you're a manager, you have to think about it, right? And that can be a difficult bridge to cross. And so in the book, the main thing that we push is this idea of commander's intent, which comes from the military, where the military talks a lot about this idea of centralized command, decentralized execution. The higher level authority is going to say, this is the thing we're going to go do. But when you're doing it, the people on the ground have the authority to lots of leeway within which they can go, right? And so the commander's intent really comes down to making sure you're very clear with your people when you're setting expectations of what is the context around all of this that this is happening in, what is the outcome that you're trying to achieve, and then what are the constraints you're operating within. So our company just went through a big or is getting ready for a big product launch. This date is set in stone. We cannot change it. For that reason, I need you to make these bug fixes and get your design in on by this time. The moment you think you are going to be even one day late, I need you to tell me. That's the context, the outcome, the constraints, right? And if you miss any one of those, that's why it's like, if you missed that, let me know the moment you think you're going to be a day late. Maybe they could have told you 3 months ago and you could deal with it and help it fix them. But now it's like a week before it's due. They're like, I need one more day. Is that okay? And you're like, no, it's not okay. But you didn't share that constraint with them, right? And so it's meant to provide a construct to, when I'm setting expectations for something with someone, what's the information I need to give them?
Yeah, I really like that, because it's clear communication. It's being very clear, very detailed, and it's also having it go down the chain. And this we find time and time again with organizations that we're coaching, where the leaders feel like there might be decisions happening up here and a plan for execution, but it doesn't trickle down with clarity and specificity.
It's a hard word.
It feels hard today. So, and then there's the breakdown. And then it can also circle back to the trust issue. It goes, it all kind of feeds each other. All right. So let's take feedback then. What would you say the big takeaway in feedback?
Most important takeaway for feedback is that before you give feedback, you need to get good at asking for feedback. right? I think that's the really important part. There's the accepting feedback, which I think is a component of this. But I think even just the asking, where rather than saying, hey, do you have any feedback for me? Every manager in the world says that in a one-on-one, and the answer is always, no, not really, right?
Because
it's just, this is amazing, because it's way too broad. And so kind of the construct that we have in the book is to talk about how when you ask for feedback, you need to ask for it in a way that is specific and assumes there is feedback. So, rather than, do you have any feedback for me? It's like, do you have any feedback for me about this meeting, right? Like, or how I led this meeting. So it's really specific. But then even more than that, it's assuming there is feedback, where rather than asking, do you have any feedback? But it's, what's one thing I could have done better in that meeting? Yeah. Right. So you're narrowing the focus. So it's not this big, like, blank white space that you're asking them to fill. And then you're asking in such a way that they're not saying something needs to be said, you're saying something needs to be said. So it kind of takes that weight off of them. So I think that's the main takeaway.
I really, really like that. So, and it's also focusing in on, what could I have done better? And that's one thing when we think about through the positive psychology lens, which our organization has that thread, it's appreciative inquiry. What, if I ran this meeting even more effectively, what would I have done differently is what I hear in that. Yeah. And then it's also giving almost a safe space for someone reporting to you to share. So the meeting was great. I really like how you presented this. And if you added this, it may have been even clearer, or it may have been even more effective.
Yeah. It was, I think I kind of first got this idea from a presentation that I saw at the Association for Talent Development conference, where the format that was used by this manager was to ask for feedback by, like, ranking qualities. Like, there were 5 qualities, maybe there were 5 manager values or something that the company had, and she asked her team to rank them. And a member of her team was delivering the presentation with her. And so in real time, she had him rank her in the, like, 1 to 5 in these things. And you could see, like, oh, you're best at this. So second, you're really this. And then by the time he got to third, he was just like, well, you're really good at this too. And you could tell, like, if it had been, here's 5 qualities, rate me on a 5-point scale for each of these, he just would have given 5 for all of them, right? Because she's great. But that doesn't provide the manager with any information. And so doing it in a way where it's like, no, you have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Even if I'm great at number 5, I'm least great at number 5. Yeah. And the format of that evaluation forces that, versus the individual need to tell their manager, you're a 1 at this.
Right.
And so it just takes the pressure off of them.
Yeah, I really like that. As you were speaking, it also made me even think, when you're just asking for that feedback instead of, do you have any? Because that's a yes, no question. So even being able to present it such that, hey, I'm really trying to improve X, Y, and Z. And so in this meeting, I tested out doing whatever. And can you give me one idea of how I could do it even better next time? And so then you're almost doing it in service to your manager as well.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah. And definitely framing things. Whenever I talk about this, people always mention, oh, you got to get, like, the positive feedback too. And, like, things like that, and ask what I'm doing well. And so, not framing it. It's really important to figure out the right way. And everybody's different in this, to frame things, not as in just like good, bad feedback. It's all constructive feedback. Everything's good feedback.
Yeah. Well, and that's why for our organization, which our viewers and listeners have heard me talk about, we use the Shift Positive 360, which is a transparent 360 tool. It's all interview based, and it is grounded in appreciative inquiry. And so it's not about, where has Matt fallen short? It is about, if Matt were even more effective, what would he be doing differently? You still get to where there's a gap, but it's really focused on what you can do, because we spend so much time looking in the rearview mirror, and we cannot change that. So instead, let's look in the forward window and think, okay, if you were even more effective, this is exactly what I'd see you doing. Yeah. And now I can play with that. Now I can do something about it.
Yeah, exactly right.
All right, Matt. So as I told you, these go so quickly. So
Yes.
what would you say you hope is our big takeaway today for our listeners?
Biggest takeaway for me is that small things make a big difference, especially when it comes to people leadership, building connection.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be a big thing, right? It's just thinking through what are the small everyday steps you can take to better connect with people and better communicate with them, right? If you're doing that, then even in the smallest ways, then whether you're a formal manager or not, you're leading people in a good, positive way. And so I think removing some of the stress about becoming an excellent leader, like let's forget about that. Let's just take one step forward, and then that's how we get better.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Don't overthink it. Stay small. Keep it simple. Yep. All right. One mindset shift.
Honestly, many of your listeners probably already have this, but the really important realization and understanding that when it comes to accomplishing big things, it's essentially always about people, not problems. Right. I just on my own podcast, I just interviewed Dr. Thomas Saarbrücken, who was the associate director of the NASA Science Mission Directorate. So he oversaw James Webb Space Telescope, and I think he oversaw almost $50 billion worth of budget over his time. He was in that position for like 8 years, and he said that when he looked at all these giant, big, highly technical missions that went wrong, got behind, went over budget, when there's a mistake, 70% of the time, it's a people problem. 30% of the time, it's a technical problem. So it doesn't matter how big, cutting edge the technology part of it is, the people is still where you need to be putting the majority of your focus, because that's where the majority of the problems are going to come from.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And what is one teeny tiny simple thing that somebody can do right when they stop listening to this podcast to become a minimum viable manager?
Number one thing is start asking these icebreaker questions at the beginning of meetings. I think whether it's a team meeting or whether it's just a personal meeting, we've all been in meetings that it's meant to be a 30-minute meeting. For 20 minutes, you're BSing about like a football game or something. Don't do that.
Yeah.
But do deliberately take 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes to just connect as people first. It'll make all the difference in the world.
Yeah. And I will do a plug for a previous episode that I did with Rebecca Hines, who wrote a phenomenal book on your best meeting ever. So if you feel like your meetings are not as good as you want them to be, take Matt's tip and then go listen to that episode that we did not too long ago. It is a phenomenal episode, and she will really shift your thinking about when to have a meeting, when not to have a meeting, and when you do have a meeting, how to do it well. And my last question for you is, what's possible when you learn the skills of a minimum viable manager?
Solving the world's biggest problems, honestly. I mean, like if you look, I'm in this big phase right now of reading about like Apollo and the Manhattan Project and all these big, massive, groundbreaking things. And it all comes down to just people working together effectively. And in fact, there have been numerous papers that have talked about, even at the time of Apollo, that the big breakthrough of Apollo wasn't going to the moon. It was the management style they used to get tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people working together to accomplish this singular goal. And so when you have an organization that uses these kinds of principles where being a manager is like a central focus, anything is possible.
Love it. And Matt, is there anything that I did not ask you today that you wish that I did?
Only thing I'll add is the book is going to be coming out in August of this year. So August 2026, look for Minimum Viable Manager on the bookshelves.
Matt Gjertsen, thank you so much for joining me on What's Possible. I cannot wait to read your book.
Thank you so much for having me, Ilene. This has been great.